for Current Issues in Sports Law panel. So let me introduce the panelists. Rick Horrow, as CEO of Horrow Sports Ventures, he has been the architect of over 100 deals worth more than $13 billion in sports, performing arts, and other urban infrastructure projects. He's also the host of Power of Sports on Fox Sports Regional Networks and Reuters' Keeping Score podcast. Jennifer Cocraft is a media, sports, and entertainment attorney for Dickinson, Wright, Las Vegas. She practices primarily in the areas of domestic and international trademark and copyright prosecution, licensing, and enforcement. Eric Macramalla is a partner and trademark agent at Gowlings, as well as a member of the firm's intellectual property group, one of his trademark litigation and prosecution practice. On top of that, he's a regular contributor to TSN.ca and TSN Radio, having built a reputation as a respected voice on the legal side of sports. And as someone in TV, that means he's very smart, but he can simplify it for minds like me, so that's always appreciated. And Andrew Moss is the global head of media and entertainment at Nolan Partners, a company which helps corporations find executives for business leadership roles. And our moderator is a familiar face, Trevor Whiffen, the co-chair of this event, and he also serves as the governor of the London Knights, and he's a partner at Dickinson Wright. He's one of Canada's leading sports lawyers, and he has argued cases at every level, including the Supreme Court of Canada. So lots to get into. It's the current issues in sports law.
Thanks, Caroline. Good afternoon and welcome. It's an honor for me to moderate this panel. This may be, with no disrespect to any previous legal panels, this may be the best group I think we've ever had. And it's got a truly international flavor as well. Andrew, I don't think you mentioned in the introduction, hails from England, where he's done extensive work on the business and broadcast side of professional soccer. Rick Horrow is from Miami, a Harvard-trained lawyer, as he's fond of telling us, and a classmate of Brian's, who hosts his own radio and TV shows dealing with sports and is considered one of the leading experts in facilities and construction and development, and has actually written a couple of textbooks about it, which I'm sure Rick is happy to share with you if you've got a few extra shekels.
A couple of bucks.
Rick, my first question before I go any further is for you. How old is that picture?
1983. Berkey and I were drinking together then, and that was our picture. I don't know. I mean, just, you don't want a picture of today. Today would be
no.
We're more seasoned.
Yeah, none of us get younger or better looking.
I do.
And Jennifer, with the exception of Jennifer. Yeah. Jennifer is a partner in my firm's Las Vegas office. She is a leading lawyer in sports entertainment and media in her neck of the woods. She acts for Shaquille O'Neal, the Kardashian family, and UFC, to name a few clients. And of course, Eric Macramalla, who, if you've been here before, you've seen Eric. He's well established as a leader in sports broadcasting. He has his own radio show on TSN and is a professor at the University of Ottawa Law School, so he's distinguished himself in the academic world as well.
And I'd add, this is an international panel because I'm Egyptian. That adds another layer to it.
Eric once sent me a photo when he was on holiday somewhere, and he was wearing a flowered shirt, and he said, "Finally, I don't get asked where the towels are by the pool."
The thing is when I go on vacation, I get really dark really, really fast. They'll go and go, "Oh, hola, senor." I'm like, I'm not Mexican, no. I'm not Cuban, and I'm not taking your wet towels.
You're not going to make fun of that picture? Look at that picture.
I'm about 25 pounds lighter.
There. He's handsome.
25 pounds lighter. That was that's from my Miami Vice
Welcome to
days.
the panel, and thank you all for participating. As God is my witness, when I wrote these notes 2 days ago, I'm just going to read it to you verbatim. For the first time in many years, the sports legal landscape is no longer being dominated by stories about Deflategate and concussion litigation. Well, of course, now only half of that is true, because concussion litigation is now back on the forefront as of this morning, thanks to Christine Simpsons for giving us a head up about that. So let's deal with the concussion litigation issue because it is so current. Rick, I'm going to start with you on this. Tell us what's happened in the last few months and the last couple of days.
Well, legally, Eric can also talk about it too, but the settlement deals with the union and the individuals and the association relative to current claims. It doesn't, in my mind, speak to the broader context of how to resolve all of this in the real world, and it's not really centered only, it's only hockey. You got football, you got minor leagues, you got Pop Warner, you've got all of the other issues. And to me, and again, broadly defined here, the whole idea now of concussion issues in a field where the due diligence to respond to the science for negligence and other purposes strives to stay one step ahead of the science, because the science is evolving as well. And throwing money at a problem and saying you're solving it doesn't solve it. So to me, and we talked a little bit about this at lunch, one of the most important issues. Wow, does that mean I have to stop?
Oh.
No? Is that all right? It's like a bell? One of the most, first thing you ever did?
I got that for you.
One of the most important issues.
Very
We spent a
expensive.
lot of money on
Thank you.
science this year.
Thank you. Is to deal with certainty as we're perfect. Long-term certainty and stability. When you talk to owners of pro sports teams, major league and minor league teams, the one big open question that can't be covered by any lawyer's opinion letter or anything else is how do we deal with the long-term issues of concussion litigation? It can be astronomical, more than anything else. So any issue now has to resolve clarity, not deal with clarity, not make it more ambiguous. And I guess today it's left more questions open than closed. I mean, I would say we'll deal with the issue down the road. That's my take on it, though.
Eric, you've read up on it in the last couple hours.
Well, I mean,
Share your thoughts.
The settlement agreement is relatively new. There aren't a lot of details. I haven't had a chance to review the agreement. I've had a chance to review the memorandum that was released in part by Stephen Silverman, who was the first lawyer that initiated a class action lawsuit in the state of Michigan. I've had Steve on my show, so he was nice enough to send it to me. What I can tell you is this to date. This is what I know, is this settlement binds up to 318 NHL hockey players. It's not like the NFL class action settlement that bound up to 18,000 NFL retired players, because that class was certified by the court. This NHL class of 318 plaintiffs wasn't certified by the court, so it doesn't catch the rest of the players that haven't actively sought to sue. Now, those 318 players are going to have the option to opt out. They have 75 days. So they get a letter from their lawyer saying, okay, here's how much money you're going to get, about $22,000 on average. You have the option to agree to that, or you can opt out and file your own lawsuit. So a few players have already said, well, I'm going to see this to the end. I'm not going to accept this agreement. $22,000 is not enough. And for some players, they feel like it's a moral issue, so they want to take this as far as it can go. Okay,
let me just stop you there for a second. What about all the players who are not part of that uncertified class?
I was just about to get there. Got to be patient. So because it's not a certified class, the rest of the players here are not captured by the settlement agreement. They can certainly express that they want to be part of it. But what is interesting about the agreement, we compare it to the NFL concussion litigation agreement is...
Well, hang on. Can people who are currently not plaintiffs now become plaintiffs and opt into this settlement?
They have the option.
Okay.
Yes. What is really interesting about the monetary damages here is that under the NFL concussion litigation, you had this table. You had diseases on top and ages on the side. If you were 60 years old and you had Parkinson's, you got $110,000, for example. If you were 22 or 28 years old and you suffer from depression, you got $42,000. In this instance here, the monetary damages don't distinguish according to what ailment you have, right? In any event, in the NFL concussion lawsuit, we saw about 150 players opt out. A lot of them were players, it was their estates because the players had passed away. Dave Duerson's family opted out, Junior Seau's family opted out. And in those instances, you're more likely to see opt-outs when a player has passed away, because for the family, it's no longer about the money. For them, it's about trying to hold someone responsible, right or wrong.
Okay. Andrew, and this will be a bit of a trick question for Andrew, because this was not on the list of things we discussed, but soccer, and you're very familiar with that, is one of the greatest causes of concussions in non-full contact sports. Has there been concussion litigation in the UK about soccer?
No.
And why is it? Okay.
Lawyers can give short answers. I mean, look, I'm the one person who traded out of a career in law. Maybe my answers were needed to be longer to justify the sort of firm's fees that I was expected. But I step back on principles, and I think the soccer issues date way, way, way back when the balls were the old leather balls. They gathered water. Anyone going to head the ball would effectively, potentially have some form of concussive issue, even if it didn't lead to injury. So I kind of step back on broad principles and say, is the law, are the rules of negligence, is litigation enough to overcome negligence ultimately. So for me, and we said this when we spoke briefly about it, it's a safeguarding issue. So is that the responsibility of the rule makers, the federations, the teams? How far does this extend? And I don't profess anyway to be certainly a Canadian lawyer or a US lawyer, but where do you go with, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking my knee's about to give way because I had a hit at tennis this morning. I had an ACL injury when I played rugby semi-professionally. At what point do you start to take this beyond concussive? At what point are people putting their bodies on the line for a career that may not deliver because you get cut short too early? So I think there's an awful lot of issues as I hear these conversations that haven't been addressed. And I don't think it should be the realms of the lawyers, frankly, that fix that. It needs to be a legislative issue that is passed on to the rule makers. If the games are unsafe, it doesn't matter how much we might like them as fans, are we going to send our children to go play them?
Eric?
I think Andrew raises a good point. And so the really important part of the NFL concussion litigation and the NHL concussion litigation, it's one word, it's concealment. That's the key to litigation. If the NFL players are able to show that the league knew about the long-term impact of repeated headshots, namely brain damage, and concealed it from the players, and that information was not otherwise available to the players, then the league was sunk. Same thing with the NHL. So it all goes to concealment, and that's why these were such tough lawsuits. You have to be able to prove your case. It's one thing to sue, it's another thing to win, Trevor.
Okay, Jennifer, you're familiar with UFC more so than anybody in the room. Has UFC had similar types of litigation involving concussions?
Not that I'm aware. In terms of in terms of the athletes, no, I'm not aware of any litigation in terms of their concussions. But I know that they are very aware of the potential health issues with their fighters, and I know that they have programs to protect them. But I don't know of any actual litigation.
Do you see that as an area that's ripe for litigation, given the intense contact and violence that's in UFC?
Well,
and I know you.
I'm probably not the right person to ask that question to.
Okay, well, let me ask you a different question, which I think you can answer. Mm-hmm. What about the issues of voluntary assumption of risk, which is a legal principle, and consent? You step into the ring, you know you're going to get smacked. You step onto the football field, you know you're going to get smacked. Even in soccer, you know you may have to head the ball, and that may concuss you. So how does consent and voluntary assumption of risk fit in with UFC?
Well, it really depends on what you're consenting to, right? You're consenting to go into a ring and have physical contact with another individual in that ring. Are you consenting to then have, long-term effects from that impact? I don't know that there's actual consent there, but in any event, I have looked at those agreements between the fighters and the UFC. There's a lot of very protective provisions in that agreement. Without going into too much details.
Well, given what we all now know about concussions, and Rick, you were on a panel here 8 years ago where we talked about concussions, and I remember you expressed concern then that it was going to have a trickle-down effect to Pop Warner and who was going to volunteer to coach and be a manager, et cetera, et cetera. So this has been around for a long time. So in light of that, how can a fighter in UFC not claim to have knowledge of the implications of being struck to the head, and how can they not have consented or voluntarily assumed that risk given all that we know in 2018?
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll say, more so now, I think there's knowledge and understanding of what long-term effects there are in having being engaged in such a physical activity as mixed martial arts. But I'm saying that when you enter into an agreement to fight, there's a question as to what they're consenting to.
Well, and here's another layer to that issue, because it's very easy to be critical of, whether you're a fan of or otherwise, but boxing is the other example. And a lot of work in the UK and around the world about whether you are able to actually voluntarily consent to something that would otherwise be an illegal act. Mm-hmm. And just because the Marquis of Queensberry or whoever else sets the rules and then takes on the setting of those rules, deems it to be a safe or regulated activity, it's still outside of that ring a common assault, if not much more. So, as I said before, I think this falls back on the lawmakers and the legislature to whether you want to make it illegal, whether you want to ban it, or whether you want to try and provide for all sorts of future risk that you may be assuming, there has to be an informed financial transaction as well as the safety issue.
Rick.
The dating of this even further, and I'll just want him to just be quiet for a minute. My thesis at Harvard Law School was fighting in hockey, excessive versus aggressive, and this was a guy from Miami who knew nothing about the sport, and our friend here let me have it for not knowing anything about the sport. Fill in the blank, because he let you have it for not knowing anything about anything. But the point I was going to make is the common law issues that were raised then or relevant then really haven't changed. What do you consent to when you get into a sporting event? Do you consent to things that are normal, aggressive part of the game behavior? Surely. Do you consent to something excessive? Probably not. But the devil's in the details, obviously, and I guess all I'm saying is that in the last half century or so, the legal doctrines effectively are the same. The circumstances obviously change.
Let's understand this issue of consent. So let's use hockey as an example. When you step on the ice, you agree to incidental contact. Okay? You don't agree to an instance where, for example, it's a case of headhunting. You agree to contact that is incidental to the game. The entire world went crazy. I think it was back in 2016 when Stephen Miller, Vice President of Player Health and Safety for the NFL, went before a House committee, and he declared that the NFL acknowledges a link between repeated headshots and permanent brain damage. The world went crazy. I was sitting at my office desk, getting fatter as I normally do. I remember thinking to myself, he's just drawing, the NFL is drawing a consent line in the sand. All they're saying is, okay, now we acknowledge it. If we know it, then you know it. So if you're an NFL player from this point onwards that wants to allege that the NFL concealed the long-term impact of repeated headshots from the players to the players' detriment, you can't do that. You may have a claim against the league if a team, for example, hasn't properly managed your concussion symptoms, like putting you in that tent. You know how Aaron Rodgers goes in the tent, all the players go in the tent? It's all about managing concussions with concussion protocol.
Thank you. That was completely unscripted based upon what happened today. So thanks, guys, for going off script and talking about something that just happened this morning. Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick. Rick, I want to start with you. What's the update on the Colin Kaepernick grievance against the National Football League?
Well, the grievance is still there. I think I understand from people that it'll be wrapped up in the next 2 months, but nobody really knows. And the issue is, again, is there some action that's provable that has basically kept him out of football for all of these years other than his attitude? And the issue is, was he a good enough quarterback where otherwise he should have been given a shot, but for some notion of collusion, which is another issue that's the C word, but everybody has to deal with that, versus people who could take his place. And that's where the testimony has gone. He's gone on to a successful Nike-funded ambassadorial career, which has basically given him a niche in the marketplace. But from a legal perspective, it is still hot. It's still there. It does not look like it's going to settle. It hasn't yet, and it looks like we'll have some ruling in the next couple of months.
When you say a ruling by the arbitrator and,
yes.
and the grievance?
Yes.
Okay, Eric, how do you think that that's going to get resolved?
Okay, so collusion is when two or more parties work in concert to deprive Colin Kaepernick of a collectively bargained right. That is not the opportunity to play in the NFL. It is not collusion if the Seahawks say, Kaepernick, I don't want to sign you because of your anthem demonstration. Now look, I'm not calling it an anthem protest. To me, it's a protest during the anthem. It's an anthem demonstration. But it's not collusion. If one team says, I don't want you because of that, because that's not good for business. You only need at least half of my fan base. For it to elevate to the level of collusion, it has to be two or more teams, or the league and a team, agreeing ahead of time that they are not going to offer him a deal because of his anthem demonstration. So I want to be clear, it's not collusion that he doesn't have a job. You have to look at the circumstances behind that. How will this unfold? His lawyer, Mark Garagos, who represented Phil Spector and Chris Brown and other celebrities, the reason he filed the complaint, if you read the complaint, it's about 27 pages, and he says stuff like, it's collusion because a team on Monday morning at 10 o'clock at 10 o'clock, they had an interest and then they went silent. That is not collusion. So they have to have good evidence. And why is that? For two big reasons. Number one, if Colin Kaepernick is successful with his collusion claim, He's entitled to treble damages, 3 times the damages. So let's say he's going to make about $40 million over the rest of his career. He's entitled to in excess of $100 million. On top of that, that's actually the small point. The bigger point is, if it's found that 14 or more owners colluded against Colin Kaepernick, the union, the NFLPA and its head DeMaurice Smith, have the option to terminate the CBA. That's a nuclear option. If you terminate the CBA, then you have no agreement governing this relationship, and suddenly everything in place, free agency rules, arbitration, all this stuff, becomes vulnerable to antitrust litigation. It's a huge, huge deal. So Kaepernick's got a really big hill to climb. Eric Reid was unsuccessful in his claim. Everything turns on the evidence. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can tell you, if Kaepernick is successful, which I don't think he will be, if he is, this is catastrophic for the NFL.
Don't you think it also opens up potential other complaints? Aren't there others who are complaining of similar collusion?
Yeah, there was Eric Reid has since been signed by the Seahawks. Seahawks? No, by Carolina, right? Carolina. Yeah, Panthers didn't look so good last game, but no one did. That front seven for the Steelers looked terrific. It's as if Carolina had no offensive line. It was the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. But so Eric Reid filed a grievance. That was unsuccessful. But I guess you make a good point, is that if you are successful in litigation, it can embolden others to consider doing the same thing.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate because clearly we know where you stand on this.
You're a lawyer. You are the devil.
You think Kaepernick's conduct is so abhorrent that nobody wants to sign him? What about the NFL players that are smacking their girlfriends around and getting caught on video?
No, but I guess what I'm saying is this. It's not the conduct. It's not the anthem demonstration, which I say draw a straight line from that to collusion. What I say is, if a team elects not to sign him, the U.S. is half red, and they're not happy with him. And he's not a great quarterback to begin with. The bottom of the league is QBR.
He went to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, that was when they didn't have a book on him. I was there at that Super Bowl when the lights went out. I was afraid, by the way. Carson Palmer was on my left, had beautiful socks. When he came back, when the lights came back on, I offered him a rose. But what it is you have to have teams working in concert to deprive him of that right. It's a legal question, Trevor. That's what it is. And it's an insufficient basis to say it's collusion because he doesn't have a job based upon the anthem demonstration.
Okay.
And by the way, do you use your employer's platform as a protest? As a platform for protest? No. Do you cuff yourself to Dickinson Wright and go, hell no, I won't go? I'm all for civil disobedience. Do it on your own time. Have the judgment and wisdom to know. This is a guy that wore a Fidel Castro t-shirt to a press conference when Castro died. I wonder why the Dolphins won't sign him out of Florida. This is a guy that had socks with depictions of cops as pigs on his socks. Seriously? Is this the wisdom that we're all hoping that he's going to impart?
Hey, the NFL isn't lily white, and all these guys aren't angels. There's a lot of guys doing a lot of bad stuff in the National Football League and in other pro sports too. So it's not just Colin Kaepernick that's misbehaving.
Ray Rice is out of the league. Absolutely.
We have a live example of this at the moment in the UK, and although he's probably a little older in the rugby scene, a prodigiously talented player called Danny Cipriani, who earns his career as a professional rugby player. The question about whether he should play for England has, to a large degree, come down to the fact that with that prodigious talent comes some other issues. He is a little bit of a wild child, to say the least. And if you ask most of the players on the scene, they don't want to go near him at national level because he's unpredictable. Not because of his behaviour off the pitch, but because he can't play systems. And we heard this morning, I think, about overcoaching. But I have a fundamental problem with all of these things. Again, controversial being on a legal panel, I don't think these are legal issues at all. I think this comes down to a couple of very simple pieces. You touch on what happens with people who go home and do terrible things or outside of their playing career. So is it therefore okay, just because he hasn't got his uniform on, he can do what the hell he likes, or she could do what the hell she likes in female sports, and then you come back and play on the roster? I think you deal with things like Rehabilitation of Offenders Acts. You deal with, there can't be a simple piece that just because you do something, you can never play again. But I also think that within team sports, it's a very different analysis to individual sports. If you can't play on a team, you can't be picked for a team. And I do think part of what Eric said is right, that if you do this in uniform and you show that you actually are not getting picked, not because of collusion, but because you have an attitude problem, I don't have an issue with that.
Let me give you a practical kind of where it is today as well as regarding the NFL. So the legacy, the movement, whatever it is, the NFL had created a task force / committee to meaningfully deal with some of these issues that are raised. Because if you talk about protest, what's the form? Well, you've got to be on your own time. The Sox, all of that are, most people, many people find offensive. Certainly many people find it bad for business. But the NFL did create a committee. Malcolm Jenkins and some other players were on it, and allocated $97 million, still to be spent, but for social justice, for bail reform, ironically, for a whole bunch of issues that Kaepernick, was speaking about, protesting, to the extent you could turn his generic protest into something specific. And then fast forward, Center for Social Analytics at Stanford University. Not sure what the criteria is, but they released it last week, that said the overall relevance and positive social media is up about 9.3% this year as opposed to the same time last year. So you could glibly say the NFL is moving on and focusing on a lot of other issues, but the bottom line is this is a significant issue in the courts. The protests, the networks are not covering the national anthem as much as before. The people standing versus people not are not the issue it was before. And so I think in many ways we're largely past some of that. Kaepernick can be given some credit for starting a movement or perpetuating that caused X in a very serious way, and we'll see where the arbitrator comes out on it.
Okay, Jennifer, you do a lot of sponsorship and licensing work. Why would, in light of what Eric said about how half the country in the U.S. is red and maybe find Kaepernick's conduct offensive, why would Nike wade in and put themselves squarely in the middle of this issue? Not a legal issue, but I'd be interested to hear your opinion.
Well, I think they've determined that within a certain demographic, a younger demographic, Kaepernick is actually beloved, is actually seen as a hero, as a hero for doing what he's done. And so for Nike not to be so, I don't know, it's about the money. It's about profitability. It's about selling merchandise. And they see Kaepernick as a symbol, as some of us do, as a symbol for peaceful protest, about self-empowerment, about doing something that they believe in that perhaps that might harm them in the long run. I think Nike has seen that as a great movement for their customers and their fan base, and have really tapped into it. So, with these sponsorship agreements, these talent agreements that they have with their athletes, there's a huge morals provision where they could pretty much terminate at will, right? And they could have and didn't. And so that was their choice. And I think it was personally a very smart choice. I think they backed him because they see that a lot of their customer base are supportive, and they want to take part of that movement.
Wider field, mobile quarterback, more liberal country. CFL interested?
Maybe. We brought in Johnny Manziel, and some might say Manziel has been the subject of collusion as well. Others might say he's just not good enough anymore to play.
Yeah. Okay.
Trevor, I'd add this. I work with brand owners. Brand owners are typically risk adverse. What Nike did was absolutely brilliant. Yes, if you compare their shoe sales to 10 to 14-year-olds, when the ad came out compared to the year before, they went up 37%. Nike understands. When Nike stood by Tiger Woods and ran his car into a tree on Thanksgiving night, right? Nike understands that part of brand development is engaging in a narrative. Nike has made themselves part of the social consciousness as a brand that is relatively unprecedented. What Nike did was brilliant, and I think it was a great idea. The other issue that I want to raise, what I think is interesting, is that Kaepernick, through his lawyer Garagos, Garagos got a podcast, of all things, believe it or not, and he's expressed a number of times that Kaepernick is ready to go back and play in the NFL if he gets a call. My question to you guys is, the mythology of Colin Kaepernick now exceeds who he is. Is it in Colin Kaepernick's best interest to go back in the NFL, where he'll play for a year or two and then likely just disappear? He's not a great quarterback. Or is
he's
it
only
in his best
31.
interest?
You got quarterbacks in the NFL who are in their 40s now.
Yeah, but once Colin Kaepernick was, this is sort of football discussion, but when Kaepernick was forced to throw from the pocket, when they got a book on him, he was wildly inaccurate. This is just, just watch the way he played. Stephon Gilmore said that he's just not very good.
Plus, Eric, let me interrupt you. Nike has been very careful not to touch Kaepernick in front of people my age And
Yeah.
you
Totally.
audiences, they've bisected their advertising, so that it's been brilliant.
Absolutely right.
They're catering to that group
Right.
and not managing to offend my group.
And what's amazing is that now brand owners can do that, right? They can advertise on certain websites and avoid other sites. It really is different. I guess the only question I have is it in Kaepernick's best interest not to go back to the NFL and then continue to engage in his second career, which is this advocate.
And again, regardless
Can he not
of-
do both?
Yeah.
Players like to play.
I think if he goes, just in my opinion, if he goes back to the NFL and his career unfolds as I suspect it would, that may undermine the mythology of Colin Kaepernick. That's just an open question.
You guys are some of your Buffalo Bill fans. They went through 4 quarterbacks this year. They started a guy who basically just stepped on until Allen came back. I'm not sure Kaepernick got a call. I'm pretty sure that he didn't. So I don't know what that tells you. It tells you a lot of different things.
All right, well, let's switch gears. Gambling in the U.S. I'm going to start with Jennifer, who practices right in Las Vegas. In May of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court made a decision that allows all states, in addition to Nevada, who is currently the only state that can have single game bets, to engage in single game betting. Jennifer, tell us why it was an evil in the past and why other states were not allowed, and how you think this will impact on gaming and gambling in the U.S., sports gambling.
Well, you're referring to PASPA, and that is really not so much that they've legalized sports betting in the states. It's more that now it's up to the states to determine whether they can allow sports betting in their states. So back in, I forget now, a decade ago, when it was first enacted, each of the states were able to opt in, and they just chose not to. And there were some states that were grandfathered in, like Nevada, that had statewide gaming. There are other states as well that got grandfathered in, but including Nevada. And so when the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional, it now is up to the states to determine whether they can, they want to regulate and legalize sports betting in their state.
And this was brought forward by New Jersey, who clearly wants to move forward with it.
Right.
Do you see a groundswell of support in other states coming forward and wanting to have single game bets in their states?
Oh, I'm sure, because it's a huge monetary source. I imagine that there are several other states who are in movement now to legalize sports betting in their state.
Rick?
New Jersey's revenues have grown 150% every other week, bi-weekly. What is it, every other week? Yeah, bi-weekly.
You mean the states like GNP? Sort of?
The revenues from the gaming operations since they originally were allowed to open, and it took them about 3 weeks to get going. Delaware's doing it. A lot of other states are seeking enabling legislation. Prediction is that by the end of next year, there'll be 20 to 25 states that are actually in the business of gaming, and then it gets into MGM and Caesars have just signed deals. MGM did the deal with the NHL and the NBA that are now data deals, so it's marketing deals. And it's not too long from now, we can talk about this, that you're actually going to have, or at least discussion about, gaming houses in facilities where years ago in the leather helmet days when I was doing my thing, they said stay away from anything related to revenue streams of casino sponsorships, gambling, Native American land, all of that stuff, because we don't want to mix. Now, obviously, Vegas, the Knights, the Raiders, but it's way beyond that. There is a mixture, there is an immersion, and yesterday Caesar signed a marketing deal with the Knights, which of course puts in signage advertising in the gambling center of the universe, and it's just a matter of time.
The Devils are going to have a William Hill, I guess, kiosk or whatever, be able to place bets at the Prudential Center. And you mentioned about 24 states. 24 states should have something in place within the next 12 to 18 months. And about 37 states in total will have something in place within the next 3 to 4 years.
Now, Andrew, in the UK, I think you're much more evolved on the gaming side than we are, certainly in Canada and even in the US. Give us a summary of what's permitted in the UK.
Well, the old adage, all bets are off. I mean, we've had gambling associated with sports and books made since sport began. And I find it really interesting when I read into this from the UK and not just all the noise and the sort of hoo-ha, but we joked at lunchtime. This goes back to a course that I took in Texas. I went to law school in Austin at UT, and constitutional law. This is all about economic analysis, and rather than state by state, really it's been all about where do you put the kink in the hose, and quite rightly touched on data. this really becomes around economic analysis and how much money is in a system. And so when I sort of traded out of a career in law and moved into Strat management consultancy, really the analysis is about value, and then how do you regulate? And a lot of sports administrators in the UK have struggled to keep up with technology. So take tennis as an example. They're in the process of establishing an independent tennis integrity unit. The top level of tennis is not an issue because the cameras are on. But outside of I think there's some analysis I read recently, the top 200 or so men and the top 120 odd women, it's very difficult to break even as an athlete. So lower down on the satellite tours and the different places where there are no cameras, but the data provision has gone all the way through the game, the administrators have struggled to keep up with a structure that the lawyers, and we have some eminent Queen's Counsel who have analysed this and said the administrators have fallen short. So I think the really interesting bit from a gaming and gambling point of view is how do you keep up with technology, and how do you perform the right type of economic analysis that says there is money in the system? And the really interesting bit to me, or the bit that makes me laugh, it's not as if gambling is new to the US. As far as I'm aware, it's just been kept to very specific places. And so this then becomes political, which I completely stay away from. But I think that the simple analysis is we've had gambling associated with sport since sport began. And I don't think there's any issue with it as long as it's handled properly, and the Gambling Commission, through the Gambling Act, licenses this so that the money not only flows through the sport, but you don't get people trying to fix the books and create false markets.
By the way, sorry, did you bring that accent to UT? When you were at UT, did you actually?
I plumbed it up. I did a lot of Hugh Grant. I couldn't possibly comment on it.
I wasn't sure how long that worked for you.
Seemed to go down a treat.
So, when the U.S. Supreme Court struck down that law as unconstitutional, prohibiting states from putting in place betting laws, it is bound to have the most dramatic impact on sports franchises. The Cowboys are worth $5 billion today. Within a few years, they're worth $10 billion. Franchise valuations are going to double. The estimate is between $150 and $400 billion a year is bet in North America on sports. Most of it, I presume, on the NFL. There are some legal issues that people are looking at and considering from the union side. The NBPA, led by Michelle Roberts, Don Fear, the NHLPA, DeMaurice Smith, and Tony Clark with the MLBPA. They want to ensure, especially with the NBPA and the NHLPA, that gambling revenue falls into the basketball-related revenue bucket, the hockey-related revenue bucket, so it is shared with the players. When this NHL CBA comes due, a key issue, I think, is not going to be the 50-50 split. That will be challenged. It's going to be what goes in the hockey-related revenue bucket. If there's less to share, the players won't be happy, right? So I think union heads want to make sure that that gambling revenue is accounted for, players get that. I think there's also the issue of personality rights. You can make prop bets. So I'm sitting and I'm watching Westbrook play for the Thunder. We all know Westbrook loves his triple doubles, right? So what's the over-under on Westbrook boxing out his own player to get a rebound, or passing the ball to himself and then scoring, right? To bump up his own stats. I'm using his likeness now in the bet. So unions are going to want to address that. There's also the issue of safety. If I'm placing bets over under on how many points LeBron is going to score in the third quarter, and LeBron doesn't score, you've got 20,000 angry fans, let's say 5 of them have placed a bet on him, his safety will be an issue. When I spoke to Michelle Roberts, the head of the NBPA, the NBA's Player Association, she spoke to me at length about these concerns of safety and personality rights.
Let's not, before you leave, because I know you don't have time, but we'll do it anyway, cover up the fantasy issue too, because fantasy, FanDuel, DraftKings, the New York Supreme Court just basically said that you have all of the prohibitions in gambling in New York cover fantasy, daily fantasy, and so they're not allowed to do business in New York. They haven't been for a while, but this is under that large tent. The only advantage of all of this is, you remember those old FanDuel and DraftKings ads, which were just so obnoxious for years? We won't see those for a little while, at least in New York. But that's an issue.
And don't forget, Boston College basketball,
Yeah.
the referee in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
We have seen gambling scandals in our time. That risk is there whether it's legalized or not. We got to really watch this.
Yeah.
And we have a history in North
Fair.
America, starting with the Black Sox scandal. And then Pete Rose bet on the games as a player and a manager. The reason he was banned from baseball in Rule 21B as for betting on the game as a manager or as an employee is because Fay Vincent and Gio Maddie at the time, Fay Vincent was deputy commissioner of the Major League Baseball, they wanted to avoid engaging the union. So by not going after him as a player, they were able to avoid that. But Brian's right. I mean, I get that this is where the tide was heading. For years, I talked about that, but you have to be careful. The average salary, or the average career in the NFL is 3.5 years. If you're an NFL running back, your position is fungible, it's plug and play. You can be out of the league in 2 years with broken everything. And if you're barely making any money after taxes, and you say to yourself, I have an opportunity now to place a bet. You say, well, it's always been there. The difference is, when you pass laws, what you do is you normalize that behavior. There's ease of access. It becomes easier to access it. It becomes normalized behavior. I think this is really dangerous.
How about the Gurley play as time expired 2 weeks ago? Running back.
Yeah.
couldn't
Gurley.
punch it in, cover the spread, takes a knee.
Yeah.
Now, trying to make sure they didn't get possession again. But what if he had 10 grand on the game?
Totally.
Interesting. Right football move.
And remember,
Still, yeah.
at tennis, with respect to tennis, the guys that have been busted in tennis are the guys ranked like 200th in the world,
Yeah.
right? Because they have little to lose. If they can enjoy a significant financial windfall, and it's as easy as opening up an app, maybe you do it. I wouldn't.
Brian, this
Maybe
morning you heard Don Fear say that he doesn't think there's been any sports gambling related issues in almost 100 years since the White Sox scandal in 1919. I take it you don't agree with that.
Well, I don't think we're talking about baseball, but I was going to say, what about Pete Rose?
Yeah.
I think Don's point is he doesn't see an integrity issue. I don't have a problem with that. I trust players. The problem could be a player that gets into an addiction issue or a gambling issue of his own where he's got a large debt. They say, we can forgive your debt if you give us some information.
Right.
But my point in bringing up Boston College basketball, for the young people here, they had a major point shaving scandal where they were covering the spread.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars involved. The guys went to, Boston College students went to prison.
Right.
And isn't that the danger of allowing betting on a single game? Like in Canada, you have to bet on 3 games as part of a parlay. Isn't that part of the danger of the single game?
Yeah. Well,
We're stuck with it. Once the Supreme Court ruled as they did, I think we're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Well, you look at cricket as well. 5 days worth of cricket. I know probably not many fans, but it happens because most people are asleep, let alone the players. But the idea that a player can influence pockets of play without impacting the overall result. So whether you throw a ball or a pitch or whatever else it may be, has no impact on the result. But it goes back to things that we used to have, like the pools, even before my time. But when I was a very young man, my parents and everyone played the pools. You could bet on a score draw, a no score draw, or a home win or an away win. And if you put together the right combination, you get a prize. So we used to call that a game of skill, and that's how our gambling act kind of gets through all of this.
Just one more comment about niche sports. Fantasy, DraftKings, FanDuel would view tinkering with what they could get away with and not as kind of R&D for the bigger gambling issues. So they got into golf. And, those of us who are golfers will go to a tournament and you'll throw out a 5 and you'll say, all right, this guy's 60 yards, what club is he using? All right, so, and then, if you're right, you change money. So you walk 18 holes, by the end, you're back to even. FanDuel's DraftKings actually institutionalized all that. And there will be no doubt that because of this single action stuff, golf will have that. And it's out of the bottle. All of these, and that's why you just said tennis. The lower level guys were not only easy to get away with because the eyes weren't on them, but every shot, every swing, every forehand, backhand was immediately transferred and bet on. And so it's huge. And you're right. Not only you have to watch it, not only you have to be careful about it, but it is pervasive.
The reason we have a commissioner in sports is because of the Black Sox scandal, right? There was a retired judge,
Landis,
yeah. And he was appointed because public confidence in the game was undermined. Rule 21, you can't bet on baseball. If you bet on other teams, if Pete Rose bet on the Brewers, it's a 1-year ban. Bets on his own team, it's a lifetime ban. Rule 21 is everywhere. You walk in the clubhouse, it's over the clubhouse. Every player must sign an agreement beginning of every single season, acknowledging they will not bet on baseball, and if they do, they acknowledge they'll be banned for life. It's on the toilet paper in the clubhouse. It's everywhere. Why is that? It's there because if you bet on what attracts us to sport is the outcome is not fixed. And once that premise, that notion is undermined, you undermine the very integrity of sports. That's why it's a big deal.
Who actually believes that they don't do it directly, though? I mean, passing on information and doing all sorts of things. I mean, I think it's kind of smoking crack to think that this doesn't happen already. Just because they don't get caught doing it directly, passing on information, even not to family members, but I think we just have to accept that the modern world is going to allow economic systems to take over, and the gambling legislation in the US must turn, and in Canada must turn to international counterparts and learn lessons from where everyone else got it wrong, got it right, and then start building it.
Okay, 4 years ago, the National Hockey League said it would not permit betting on its games to maintain the integrity of the sport. 4 short years later, they're doing a deal with MGM. What's changed?
There's the answer to all your questions is money. Is that what Nolan said?
That's me doing this.
I thought you just had an itch.
Yeah.
So the answer to all your questions is money.
Well, no, I disagree. I mean, I suppose it is about money, yeah. But and maybe because I'm from the great state of Nevada, where I might be a little bit more desensitized to gambling. But also, it's a great form of entertainment. It is it engages fans. It has them more involved in watching, and perhaps that fan engagement comes back to money. But for me anyway, I don't view gambling as such a a taboo thing. It's legalized, it's regulated, it's something that's looked over. And if you think that just because PASPA was ruled unconstitutional and now each state can decide whether or not they want to have state sports betting is somehow spreading the evil, I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, well, that's a good hometown perspective. But also, and it's right, it may reflect history. If you call trying to get out ahead of competitors and capturing revenue all about money, it is, but it is a sense of inevitability. So again, the whole idea of a slippery slope is not that the moral tide is now totally gone. It's that the commissioner made a decision because he had a owner that was willing to stand up. He had a new arena that was being done. He has a market of 2 million people that are family people, not just casino people, that this is an untapped market. And if you do that, you've got to rework all of your gambling protections or issues as well that go along with it. Exactly. And so it was a simultaneous business decision that will end up generating more revenue. Right. I'm not sure it relates to greed, but it's going to guide all the future actions. The reason why Florida, and I remember doing the arena in Miami back 900 years ago, and a hotelier was ready to do a little cupola on a second floor of a hotel. Well, because that year was going to be the year we passed gambling. That was 1983, and it still hasn't happened. It'll happen soon. Why? Because all of the neighboring states are doing it, so they better get it done.
And if you look to international, just one piece of comparative bit, no one should worry. Since Word began, international markets have been running this, and relatively, at least proportionately, very, very few scandals, and even then, they probably don't class as scandals. So you have to allow for a little bit of game theory or blip.
Like today? Markets up today?
Yeah.
Can we check? Let me check.
Okay, quick last question, because we are out of time, unfortunately. If the NHL is going to allow their teams to do gambling-related sponsorship deals, will the NHL allow Canadian-based hockey teams to do cannabis sponsorship deals? What's the difference? Start with Rick. We'll just go along the line.
I guess there's the Supreme Court issue which affects the U.S., which gives you a mandate to do your own thing at the state level, not that it's legal across the board, because the federal rule was struck down based on violation of interstate commerce and other constitutional issues that had very little to do with the substance and the morality of gambling. So I don't know that what happened in the U.S. impacts what's happening provincially. As it relates to provincially, I guess and this is for you guys, not for me to monopolize, but is it a provincial thing? Is it a federal government thing? But it's follow the money. And why? I guess the answer is, ultimately, if you can draw best practices based on how you regulate the industry, why wouldn't you? Be the answer.
I'm seeing for the NHL a national Twinkie deal. I think it'll do really, really well. in Canada, you've got the federal law, then the provinces can put in place their own legislation. Will they allow it? Trevor, I think it's too early to tell whether they are going to allow it, but oftentimes when you deal with issues like this, there is a perceived moral issue, right? And so when that is
Gambling's
introduced...
okay, but smoking pot's not?
I'm
And
not
how's
saying
it
whether
moral-
it is
how's
or
it
not.
moral
I'm
if you
saying,
legalize?
No, I'm not saying whether I'm for it or against it. I'm saying that oftentimes you have people that will take that position, and that might hinder or get in the way of any type of deal.
I can do a really, really short one. I'd actually go in a different direction on this. I have no problem with cannabis being legalized. I think when you mix it with athletic pursuit, the sponsorship answer is no, for the simple piece that it would drive a coach and horses through anti-doping legislation, even if you try and maintain it. So I would keep clear lines of separation. Make money all sorts of other places, but not in a world of sport where, at least from a non-medicinal point of view, cannabis would be deemed to be an anti-doping breach.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I completely agree. There's a difference between allowing sponsorship of cannabis products and services versus the use of cannabis in the sport. So do I think that there should be a movement towards allowing sponsorship of cannabis products? Why not? If it's allowed in the state, then it should.
Well, let me throw this into the mix. Last comment. Tobacco sponsors in Canada are not permitted to associate themselves with sporting events. So my guess is, for the time being, cannabis won't either.
Well, and that's what Formula One went to. Tobacco and alcohol were always a big part of Formula One until around about, I think it was 12 years ago. And then those products were banned from a sponsorship point of view. Not for anyone to use and enjoy, but just not associated with a sport.
And Winston, NASCAR, Winston Cup, that used to be it before Verizon, before Monster, but Winston was the big sponsor of NASCAR.
I think the tobacco comparison is a good one, and that's the logical one. I think the issue, the wrinkle is the future for marijuana is edibles and products that are infused with marijuana. Like I've got a client that makes vodka. They'll be infusing marijuana at some point into their vodka. So where do you draw the line as to what can and cannot be advertised?
Well, you can't have celebrity endorsements in Canada of liquor either. You can't have, Brian couldn't be photographed drinking Labatt Blue. That's a violation of the law. So
I guess what I'm saying is if you have a vodka company promoting the sale of their product, and they drive you to their site and they're not promoting the marijuana-based product, but certainly on the same web page, you've got the ability to view the other product.
Okay. Thanks, guys, very much. I hope they brought the law to life. Law is not always interesting, but I hope it was today.
Congratulations, by the way. We had 8 items on the list, and you got through 2, just so you know.